All right, let's talk about chords. So first off, I want to define a word called harmony. In music, harmony means any time when there's more than one note playing simultaneously. So when we have a melody, that's just one note, one note, one note, one note in a row or in a line. But when we play notes at the same time, that's harmony. Harmony is any time you have multiple notes playing at the same time. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Doesn't matter how many. You can have lots of notes playing at once. This is just overall called harmony. And chords are harmonies. So oftentimes people define a chord as needing 3 or more notes, such as this, or this, or this, or this even. So some people will say that 2 notes is not a chord. However, I would say, and many others say as well, that a chord can be defined by just 2 notes. And a chord can be implied even by just 2 notes. So these 2 notes sound very much like this 3-note chord. 2, 3. So even though a lot of people will define chords as needing 3 notes, you can just think of a chord as being 2 or more notes played simultaneously. That's a simple definition that we can stick with for now. So a chord and a harmony are the same thing, basically an interchangeable word. Now all chords have names to identify them, and a chord is named by its root note and its quality. Now if you recall, the word root note means the note that the chord or scale is based off of, its home note, the most important note in the chord, the note that ties the whole thing together. So if I play this chord, C major, C is the root note here. If I play G minor, G is the root note. G is the note that the chord is built off of, is created from, is the organizing principle that brings all the other notes together and makes sense of them. So that's what a root note is, and then there's all these kinds of chord qualities: major, minor, suspended, diminished, augmented, 7s, 9s, 11s, 13s, altered chords, all sorts of craziness. And a chord is defined by its root note and its quality. So when I play this chord, as you can see down below, it says F major 7. So F is the root note, major 7 is the chord type. So if someone wanted me to play an E major 7, I would have to find the E note, and then I would have to know what a major 7th chord is and build that off of that note, and I get E major 7. So the quality, major 7, can be applied to any root note. Any chord quality can be applied to any root note. And so to define the chord, we have the root note and the chord quality. Now of all these qualities, the most important or most commonly used and primary chords in modern music are major and minor chords. So a major chord sounds like this, quite bright and positive, maybe uplifting or happy, and a minor chord on the same root note sounds like this, a little bit darker, maybe sadder. So this is C minor, C major. Now if I play major chords on different root notes, G major, A major, F major, they always sound kind of positive, kind of happy or uplifting. That's because every chord quality always sounds the same, always sounds the way that it does. So if I take a minor chord, E minor, and I put it on B, it sounds like a minor chord. And I put it on F sharp, it sounds like F sharp minor. Minor will always sound like minor. Major will always sound like major. So we can get used to these sounds so that when we hear them, we can identify, oh, that's a major chord. It has that positive, uplifting feel. And then when we hear a minor chord, we'll be able to identify that as well. And when we're writing our own music, we'll be able to make a choice. Do I want this part to have a minor feel or a major feel? And that will determine what chords we're going to use there. So getting familiar with these terms, major and minor, is important because all of modern music is based off of these 2 primary chord qualities. There are many other chord qualities as well. As we saw, we had that major 7 chord, but there's lots of other ones as well. And all the chord qualities will always sound the way they do no matter what root note you put them on. So we can get familiar with them too, and we will in the future, but for now we're going to stay simple with these 2 primary qualities, major and minor. Now as you can tell, chords produce feelings in us. They evoke emotional responses. When we play a certain chord, here's F minor, it feels like something. It doesn't just sound like doesn't sound like nothing, doesn't just sound like some random noise on the street. It creates a feeling in you. Chords are where music gets or a lot of its emotion from. There's other elements, of course, that create emotion in music too, but harmony or chords create feelings in us, and as chords change, it kind of makes a story of feelings that occur for us. And these feelings are created by the interaction of the notes inside the chord. So if we look at C major, C feels just like a single note, but when we add E to it, now it has a different feeling because the C and the E are interacting with each other and causing a relationship. And then when we add the G, now we have lots of relationships. We have the C to E, we have the E to G, and we have the C to the G, and they're all interacting with each other, and these interactions create these feelings for us. And if we alter any of the notes in the chord, the feeling changes because the relationships have changed. Now, how exactly do these relationships create the specific feelings we feel? I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows that yet. But all we need to know for now is that they do, and that we can become familiar with these feelings so that when we want to create a certain feeling in our music, we can just get used to a certain chord that creates that feeling, and we'll be able to put that into our song, and it will create that feeling in the listener as well. And these relationships can also be called intervals. An interval is the distance between two notes. This is a small interval from here to here, and this is a large interval here to here. So this C major chord has this interval and this interval and this interval between the first two, between the last two, and between the first and the last. And it's these intervals that create the feeling of the chord or the sound of the chord. So the relationships and the intervals, these are like interchangeable terms. And we're going to talk more about intervals as we go along because chords are just made of intervals. Different kinds of chords have different interval structures in them, different spacings between the notes. And it's these spacings that we want to be familiar with. I'll also say that the feelings that chords create are also changed subtly by the chords that come before them and the chords that come after them, as well as the melodies and bass lines and rhythms and everything that goes on with them too. So chords don't exist in isolation. Chords exist in relationship, like everything in music. All the elements relate to all other elements. So a chord feels a certain way. Here's C major, it feels like this. But if I'm playing, say, in the key of G minor, and I go to C, it feels a little bit different now than it did when it was just by itself. Because that chord is now in relationship with the G. It's in the key of G, so it has a different feeling. It still does sound like a major chord, like C major, but it's been altered somehow by its relationship to the G. So that's important to know too, because we're going to get into writing chord progressions, because that's what music is made of, really, is sequences of chords that repeat chord after chord after chord after chord that comes back and does them over again. And the chords have relationships to one another. So each chord has its own sound, but then each chord relates to the other chords in the progression too. Now this might sound like a lot to think about, but it's actually quite simple. You don't need to think too much about it, but it is important to understand that this is something that's happening, that the chords have their own feelings, but those feelings too are changed or modulated by what's going on around them with the other elements of the song and the other chords and so on. So that's really the basics of chords and how they function in a general way. Now we need to understand how to create these primary chord types of major and minor. So let's take a look at that.